Welcome, everybody. We're just going to let everybody start filing in, and we'll get started in another minute or so. Make sure got everybody okay to come in. All right. All right. Well, folks, welcome. My name is Tony Saramatis with Truly Wow. We are ARA's marketing and communications partner, and I'd like to welcome you to ARA's continuing education webinar for February 2025. We're going to do things a little differently today than we have in the past, a bit more collaborative in nature. Our goal is to present a problem and an opportunity to start a discussion. So at the very least, you're going to be more informed than you were before you came to this webinar about transport and remarketing. Ideally, you'll leave with enough information to create another income stream for your business without a whole lot of effort, and that's what our guest is here to flesh out. The majority of the time today we're gonna dedicate to dialogue and Q&A, and everybody is on mute. But if you have a question or a comment, please type it in the chat or raise your hand to speak. Type it in the Q&A. But do me a favor, there's a whole bunch of us here today, so keep yourself muted if you're not talking. Now I'd like to introduce you to our guest, Dave Sutton. Dave is VP of Business Development and Industry Relations for Montway Auto Transport. Dave is an industry veteran of over 30 years. He's been with GM, VW Audi North America, and Carfax. He's a certified automotive remarketer. He's active in the Automotive Remarketers Alliance. And Dave's going to share some thoughts about the opportunities that we have in the repossession side of the business. So, Dave, with that being said, if there's anything else you wanted to add about your background, please do so. But the floor is yours to get the conversation started.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tony, and thanks for all of you for taking some time out of the middle of your week. It's encouraging that there's other folks out there working to keep their tools sharp, and this is, as Tony introduced it, it's going to turn, if all goes well, more to a dialogue. And I use the word dialogue. It's a very reserved word for me. It can be sometimes confused with discussion. And discussion, I'll give you a visual effect. Discussion is like a concussion. It's like, this is what I think, this is what you think. We try to convince one another. And so I'd ask that you all kind of adopt the mentality of a dialogue, which is just, okay, I have my view. I see it through my facet, through my company, or through past roles I've been in. And that's great. I want to share that. But I'm also going to take time to set that aside, stop waiting to talk, and to listen to some other points of view or some other perspectives. So that was part of my career when I was at General Motors doing collaborative decision-making and strategy stuff. And I've been able to incorporate that into most of the roles I've served since then. And that was way back in the 90s. So let's talk about the title. And so the title was chosen with care. It's the why behind the what and best practices discussion. So sometimes we know what, sometimes we think we know what's going on. Sometimes it's not actually accurate. And I think it's pretty rare that we understand the motivation behind it as completely as we should. So with that, Tony, if you could just, and guys, beyond this title slide, I have 2 slides. So I'm going to cover the material first, just kind of walk through it, and then open it up for questions, discussion, and go from there. Seems like the easiest way to get through this and make great use of everyone's time. So Back in the day when I worked for Volkswagen of America, I was responsible for the overall used car strategy with the Audi and VW certified pre-owned teams, as well as the finance companies, remarketing operations, trying to figure out how everyone could play nice together. And so, as you can imagine, within most automotive companies, the finance arm and the auto sales arm sometimes are not all in agreement. They have different goals, they have different motivations. Um, let's take that down a level and talk about the even within the auto finance company. Yeah, even though personally I've only worked for Volkswagen Credit, I was there for 10 years. I worked for the president of Volkswagen Credit. I was privy to a lot of really interesting discussions, etc. But the reality was, as good as a high-performing team that Volkswagen of America was, and I think still is, there's still silos in there. And two of the steepest, most distant silos, unbelievably, were between the remarketing team, which I was a big part of, leading a big portion of it, and the people who are involved in the collections and the financing. So it was kind of weird because our offices were literally adjacent to one another. But I can count on no hands the number of meetings I was in together with that team. Zero meetings over 10 years. And I don't know if for those of you who are with finance companies, if that's been your experience. Hopefully it was better. But the reality was they had a very specific goal. The sales arm was sell as many vehicles as possible, channel as many through our own financing as possible. And if you couldn't do that, then hopefully the dealer body was going to work through some other finance sources, et cetera. But it was all about sales. And then when a vehicle was went into collections and repossession and that whole thing, that was considered kind of a failure. Like we screwed up. Where do we go wrong? And so they were trying to clean up their mess, try to get the customers come current on their payments. Voluntary repos were more the norm than involuntary repos. But then at some point, the vehicle was repossessed, went to a recovery yard, a repossession yard, and then something happened somewhere, the meter clicked in their process. And next thing you know, I had another assignment for my team to go pick up those cars and get that done. The way we handled it at the time was it was very simple. It was based upon the geography, the zip code where that recovery yard was. It was assigned to a particular auction. We have a network of 26 auctions, and it was then their responsibility to pick up the car. I was the kind of the, I'll use the, I'll clean up my language a bit. I was the ambivalent commercial consignor selling $2 billion worth of cars a year and just put it on the auctions. Pick up these cars. By the way, from assignment to pick up, you have 48 hours. Or no, our days to pick up, we gave them the max was 5 days. The target was 2.5 days. And so depending upon how many vehicles they had to pick up, some of them really excelled at it. Some of them really struggled at it. We reported on it every month. We contrasted it. We kind of beat the crap out of them for it, to be honest with you. And the one thing that I was wise enough to do that early in my career is I didn't include recovered vehicles or repo vehicles with the lease return vehicles. Lease return vehicles, you're going to your franchise dealers. There's a different, there's a whole different mechanism, a whole different attitude, etc. So I hope that for those of you with a finance company or those of you whose customers are a finance company, and if you're an auction, you're getting a little bit of reprieve because there are definitely some challenges to picking up cars from recovery yards. And at the time, I kind of knew generally what they were, but I was more focused on the 95, 96% of our volume, which was off-lease volume. I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention. In retrospect, I probably should have. But fortunately, if you work long enough in this industry, you get a chance to relearn what you didn't learn before. And so, you look at in some of the comments I have borrowed from folks, some of you folks on the call, from discussions we had at Used Car Week, some follow-on discussions, etc. So I'm not presenting from I'm an expert in this, but I know enough to be dangerous, and I'd like to surface this and flesh this out so that best practices become the norm. So again, from a auto finance company, no matter who they are, typically their goal is to keep that consumer in the vehicle. That makes the most financial sense for them. If they can't keep it there, then repossess the vehicle. If it's unredeemed, it goes through the whole repo process. And at some point, that vehicle becomes assigned to an auction and is available to pick up. And depending upon the finance company, they may just do what I used to do, just deal directly through the auctions. Or maybe that finance company may deal with directing and managing the transportation themselves. Or maybe they have a third party who does it. It might be a forwarder, it might be somebody else. But in essence, that vehicle needs to move physically from the recovery yard, typically to the nearest auction that finance company does business with. And a lot of them, like some of the ones who are in subprime financing, their auction network is quite large. They don't move cars a long distance. They wanted to get it to where it needs to go. It's a recovered unit, maybe not a high dollar value thing, but their key is once that clicks, once that vehicle is not redeemed, all of a sudden a new team is on the clock. It's sort of like, okay, all the other performance metrics that you have for the team that's responsible for getting the vehicle repossessed, those have been satisfied. Now it goes over the new team. And the new team is very, very, very maniacally focused, or at least they should be, is to convert that asset into cash, and certainly following all the rules that they need to with recovered units. And as I mentioned before, you have different teams, different players, and even though they might all have the same logo on their golf shirt, and they may even work in the same building, maybe they work adjacent to one another, you really have to understand this is a new team. They have a different set of processes, a different set of drivers behind what they do, and a different set of partners and suppliers who help them do it. And so just realize, okay, this is your second customer. And sometimes I've gotten the impression that a recovery yard or recovery business focuses on the first customer and doesn't really think about the remarketing entity as being a separate but equally important customer. So that was the one thing I just want to throw out there for the group. The other thing is when you're moving a recovered unit, and this is where if I'm wrong, please call me out on it, but I'm underneath the impression that the vehicles need to be hauled. They need to be on a tow truck, they need to be on a flatbed or a carrier, but you cannot use a drive team because it's a recovered vehicle. Now, some finance companies may have different policies and practices, but it's been my experience that the norm is it's a recovered or repossessed vehicle. Do not drive the vehicle because it presents some safety challenges, some insurance, some liability, as well as do you want to put extra miles on a vehicle that you're going to try to sell and then go after the consumer for the difference what it didn't sell for. So then if you can't use drive teams, which are an amazing, for those of you not familiar with auctions use of drive teams is very pervasive. If they can use a drive team, they will. It's cheaper, it's faster, and it allows that auction develop and maintain relationships with, in large part, the dealers that they're picking up dealer consigned cars, and they can use those same. So that's where their emphasis is. So just like when I was focused on my lease cars, I think auctions have had to in recent years get better or become more accustomed to picking up recovered vehicles because those represent a larger and larger portion of their inventory. So when they send out equipment, the one thing that will happen is, depending upon the vehicle, if it's been modified, does it run, start, brake, steer, what kind of drivability condition it is, that will dramatically impact what equipment needs to be sent out there. And if the transport company or who's ever picking it up, if they don't have the most accurate, reliable information, that can add a lot of days and time to, if they send the wrong equipment, you're going to have a dry run. It's frustrating for the recovery yard, etc. The auctions typically are the ones who kind of have a gun to their head, and they need to get those vehicles picked up as soon as possible. Most major consigners, they're going to be having a weekly sale or a bi-weekly sale. They don't aggregate cars like they used to. The average depreciation per day or carrying cost per day per vehicle, just in general, is about $30. And certainly if it's a older vehicle, a lower value vehicle, that amount's going to be a little bit less. And don't be deluded by all the COVID rise in used car values. That was an anomaly. You will never see that again. These cars are depreciating. There's a carrying cost. And I guarantee you, the managers who are involved in this process, they are being measured by days to sale. Thus, their auction partners are being measured by days to sale, days to pickup. And so one of the things that's always befuddled me about auctions is, look, you have a recovery yard across town. You get this assignment. You can pick it up today. And I've had many of transportation managers say, oh, we've got 5 days to pick it up. And like, well, clearly you don't understand math and how averages are computed. It's sort of like a grade point average. Get the easy ones when you can, pick up those in 1 day, because for every 3 or 4 of those, you're going to have one that is way off the beaten path that you can't pick it up possibly cost effectively in 3 to 5 days. You need to look at some other options. So when you have to pick up these cars, the auctions, sometimes they will do it themselves. All the auctions have their own equipment, but their own equipment, they want to keep their utilization rate up as high as possible. And sometimes they're challenged because the number of operators for the equipment that they have is limited, and they try to use them to provide the highest level of service to their biggest customers. That's just the way auctions work. If you're General Motors, or if you're Volkswagen, or if you're a major commercial consignor, you get a lot of love and attention. If you're a smaller finance company, you don't get as much, and they're going to try to do the best they can with their equipment. So sometimes they're going to outsource that. They can outsource it to other carriers that they deal with. They can outsource it to brokers like Montway or many of the other awesome brokers out there, or maybe it's part of the agreement between the finance company and the forwarder that they're working with. But somebody's got to move that car. And so the one thing that I was going to kind of inject into the discussion that I'm a little bit puzzled by, and I wanted to just suggest, I'm with Montway Auto, and I'm a strategic thinker. I like to think. And so, what I would propose, maybe best practice is to work with each one of the recovery yards. If we get assigned a vehicle that's at the recovery yard, to develop the relationships so that they always get the opportunity to move the vehicle if they have the equipment and if they have the capacity and the bandwidth to move it, for a few reasons. One is they probably don't have to make an appointment with themselves. They can work it into their schedule. And if they've got equipment that's leaving their lot empty to do their route, to go pick up vehicles for the night, hopefully, and keep the machine fed, maybe they can drop off a car at the local auction that's not too far off the beaten path. So that's one. Give the recovery yards a right of first refusal, and just make that your practice as a transport company or forward or who's ever operating. The other one is, okay, you, Mr. Recovery Yard, you cannot, you don't have the capacity or the interest to do that for us right now. Do you have my next question would be, do you have a preferred transportation provider that you're comfortable with coming on your lot that I can connect with to make them part of our network to pick up these cars on your lot so it works a little bit smoother for everyone? So that's option two. And then the next option would be to send a carrier or a driver who's familiar with the lot practices, the hours, the appointments, etc., and goes through that whole process. Where if that's fairly local, if that's like 100 miles or less to the auction, that's pretty easy. Not that anything's easy, but it's easier than if maybe it's a remote location and that driver has to deliver that car 150 or 200 miles away. That's where I think we run into a lot of friction, because those drivers, typically to go that distance, they're going to have more than one vehicle on their truck, even if it's a rollback. And for them to be there at the appointment times, be able to pick up the vehicle efficiently, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge, and things don't work quite as they'd like them to. Again, the auction environment and with the auto finance companies, everything's driven by service level. And the number one service level that everyone focuses on is days to sale and days to pickup. And they monitor it like hawks. And again, hopefully they're doing it a little bit differently for recovered units versus lease return. If they're not, I think they're doing it wrong. I'll tell them that to their face. You're doing it wrong because you're not being a good partner. You're penalizing that auction and all the suppliers who are working with that auction with very unrealistic expectations, because those are different worlds. Going to a dealership where the same driver picks up 4 to 8 to 12 cars every week on a certain day, knows everyone there, was able to roll in, the cars are easy to get to, easy to load. That is a very, very different assignment than going to a recovery yard. And at first, I will admit to you guys, I was like, well, what's the problem with these recovery yards? Why can't they make it easier? And then you visit one and you talk to their owners and you see the challenges that they're faced with. I mean, these cars are not lined up as most of the people, I would assume all the people in this car, they're not lined up like at a dealership or at an auction on sale day. They are utilizing the space on their lot as best they can to keep the car secure, safe, but also to maximize their footprint there, because they're focused on the velocity of moving cars. So, those are the things that, I would like to kick around with the group a little bit more. Have one more slide. I'm going to introduce a few more thoughts. If you could, Tony, move me to that one. All right. So, I talked a little bit about the recovery yard. So reliable information is hugely important. Does it have keys? Let's talk about keys for a moment. So, if you don't cut keys, as a recovery yard, do you have a preferred vendor that you work with who will cut keys? And certainly everything has to be cost competitive, et cetera. And if you don't, will you allow a third-party vendor to come on property, like a Dent Wizard Key Division or somebody like that, to come on to do it? Those are questions and challenges we have, because I will tell you, some of our major auto finance customers, they've just decided, you know what? When we sell the car at auction, it must have a key. It must start, it must drive if possible, et cetera. So getting that key ordered, a working key, is extremely important. So if you don't have those capabilities, find the capabilities. If you have a vendor nearby that you trust, that you can develop those relationships, you do a rev share, however you want to focus, make it work. You're kind of the gatekeeper for us as transportation companies. But if we're told by our customer, do not move the car until it has keys, guess what? We're not moving the car until it has keys. And if it doesn't have keys, and if it's clogging up your lot, that's a problem for everyone. Almost at the end of my slides, then I'll shut up and listen to you guys, and we can have the dialogue that we promised. Recovery yard practices. It wasn't until I saw a video by Vaughn Clemens at NARS last year that I really developed, I think, the appropriate appreciation for the challenges that a recovery yard faces with all the different customers that they have. I mean, finding the vehicle and getting the vehicle secured, that might be the easiest part of the whole thing, because then you have to inventory the vehicle and you go through your internal processes. Then you have the consumer, the customer whose vehicle was repossessed. You have maybe some challenges in dealing with them, letting them get access to personal possessions, et cetera, and doing it in a safe and efficient way, safe for your employees, safe for the vehicles, et cetera. And then depending upon your staffing level and how big of an operation you have at that geographic location, sometimes you have people wearing multiple hats. So I understand the need for multiple appointment times and windows, and there are some great tools out there. I know RDN has some tools for making appointments that make it easier for the brokers or the carriers, the drivers, to make those appointments. And I think we as a transport industry need to have, I think, overall a greater appreciation for those appointments, those appointment times, and being as timely as we can to keep those appointments. Just realizing that the further away the haul is, the more challenged that it is. It's not somebody just driving across town. And I know that each one of the practices at different recovery yards are based upon their individual experiences. They could be the best. They've optimized it for their footprint, or they've optimized it for their customer group or their consumers. But I think we always have to be looking at the end game. And the end game is getting cars recovered, getting them properly inventoried and imaged, taking care of the consumer, getting that car available to whoever is transporting it to auction, because then the auction's on the clock and their job is to turn that asset into cash as quickly as possible. So there's a bunch of internal customers within this process. And if you're not familiar with that concept, you should be, because we're all working within the system, and the system is these interrelated processes. And so, yeah, I'm sure within this group, there's some best practices for recovery yards. Those best practices, maybe you can use some of them or part of them, but I think finance companies need to be very open-minded as far as what their expectations are to allow the recovery yards to do their very best given their circumstances. I think transport companies need to be super flexible and educated and aware so that they can become good providers of service to their customers, working with the recovery yards. And I think there's a whole lot of low-hanging fruit that if we were to share some best practices, understand one another's worlds a little bit better, that I think we take a lot of friction out of the system. So Tony, with that, take the slides away if we can, make it so we can see one another. And I'll see if I know there's a question in the comments area. Tony, if there, I can see if I can pull that up in the chat. Let's see. Challenges and cost differences of transporting a vehicle to auction that has keys versus don't have keys. Well, if it doesn't have keys, depending upon if it doesn't have keys, it's more likely bad things are going to happen. How it gets put up on the rollback or tow truck, can you take it out of gear? You should be able to take it out of gear without the keys, but sometimes that's vehicle and model specific. Whenever you have to handle a car that way, you're going to impair the ability of the finance companies to collect in full from the consumer. Because the consumer, depending upon the value of the vehicle, they may hire an attorney who's trying to do everything they can to show that that finance company didn't take appropriate care with the vehicle, they didn't sell it in the most commercially viable manner, et cetera. So, and also put yourself in the shoes of a dealer. Would you buy a car without keys? Would you buy a car that you couldn't start? When that happens, there's a little thing called an uncertainty discount. If you're not sure, they say, well, maybe it needs a battery. Maybe it's got all these other issues with it. So most of what I would consider the talented and informed and well-schooled remarketers, they're going to do everything they can to the car's running so that they can be driven through the lane if they sell them in that venue, but at least have them running. And keys are important. And so frankly, it doesn't matter whether if the keys are cut at the auction or if they're done while the car is still in recovery yard, but it's better to have them cut and made as early in the process as possible, because that opens up how cost effectively you can transport it. If it doesn't roll, steer, brake, drive, it's going to be more expensive to transport. You have a smaller pool of transporters who can pick it up, and it's going to slow things down. So it's in no one's best interest to do that. Let's see. I think that was the one question I had. Tony, I'm going to ask you to help me navigate if anybody has questions. I see a lot of familiar names here, so I want to give them some airtime as well.
Sure. Well, yeah, folks, if you have a question or a comment, go ahead and put it in the chat, or just raise your hand and unmute yourself and hop in. But in the meantime, Dave, I'm wondering, so how would you describe or define the financial opportunity as you see it for a repossession agent to pursue building this process into their business model? And
Sure.
I may not be explaining that correctly or asking correctly,
I think I know what you're getting to. So if I were to put myself in the shoes of somebody who owns and operates a recovery yard or multiple recovery yards, if I would have somebody on my team who can cut keys, who can make duplicate keys, or I would have a partner, somebody who could help me do that without a doubt. The other thing is I would make sure that my staff is super, because the key cutting, I mean, there is a margin on it. It's not a huge margin, but if you add that to enough cars per week, it's just incremental money. There are some incremental costs associated with it, but you can overcome that. And even if it's a situation where you have a local locksmith company who's going to be super responsive to you, show up when you need them to show up, and you do a rev share with them. If you do that, you have a chance to make a little bit more money there, and you provide a higher level of service to your customers. Now, not every finance company is going to allow you to do that. They all have different rules when keys are cut. But I think the norm should be never move a car without a key. And as soon as you realize there's not a key with it, maybe the consumer is going to bring it in when they pick up their personal effects. They can be motivated to do that by the finance companies. But even if they do, if I was back in the remarketing world again, handling these cars, I would say just order a key, just make it happen. Because chances are, if a dealer sells a car, how many of you would buy a car with just one car key? And let's say it's a $20,000 car. Maybe it's a $4,000 car, I might, but that just seems very uncomfortable to me. So just order the keys as if you're the finance company, give them the authority to, and the recovery yards, get somebody cutting the keys and get it done as soon as you possibly can. Make it a priority because it impacts the overall performance of the process. The other thing is, if a transport company calls you, if it's a broker like Montway, what I'm trying to get our operations team to do is recognize, okay, we're not picking up a car from a consumer. We're not picking up from an auction. It's a recovery yard. So go through the questions that I threw out before is give that recovery yard the right of first refusal if they're willing to take it to the auction. Because sometimes either the auction or the finance company, as much as they'd love to have deep, awesome relationships with all of the people that touch their cars, they like to simplify things. So if they can deal with a forwarder, if they can deal with an auction company, if they can deal with a national transportation broker like Montway, they're like, here, we're giving it to you. Now it's your problem. Make stuff happen. And so if our job is to make stuff happen, if you help us do that, it's not like there's huge margins in auto transport, especially recovered units, but there are margins there. And whether you move the car or we have another carrier in our network, we're kind of indifferent. As a matter of fact, my preference would be is we have you move the car because we don't have to work around the appointments potentially. And it helps you, just like in the transport business, whenever you see a transportation or a transport vehicle, whether it's a rollback or a tow truck or a 9-car carrier or anything in between, if it's not full, that's a lost revenue opportunity. So if we can help the recovery yards, we know you have the equipment to move the cars, and maybe the logistics work out where perhaps you'd be more open to it. It may be a cultural change, but I think it would be a really good change because you have the equipment, you have the drivers, they have to leave out to go out and do their thing. And so by adding perhaps a half hour of their day, you can generate some incremental revenue. If you do that over time, you're generating incremental revenue, but more importantly, is you're providing a higher level of service to your customers.
So we've got a couple more questions coming in, Dave.
Yeah. So Steve, let's see if I
from Blake. Blake was next on the docket. As a recovery yard, we've noticed that finance companies often prefer to have a separate company handle transportation rather than the one that repossessed the vehicle. Do you know the reason behind this?
Sometimes when the company that recovers the vehicle also, there's different relationships. Some have a relationship where they drop it directly off at the auction. And so the finance companies, and there's some folks on the call who can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, they're going to have a process that they need to follow. And it could be like, no, all of our vehicles go from whoever recovers it, it needs to go to a recovery yard because then we have to go through this set of processes and steps. Separating them does provide another set of eyes, another inspection. So you have kind of a check on a chain of custody and the condition of the vehicle. That could be one of the things motivating it. The other one would be this is what I really think it is. Well, that's how we've always done it. And I think it's a new day. I think the recovery yards have great equipment. They can certainly drop off cars at the auction if the logistics, the footprint of where their vehicles go, if it includes a auction location or if it's not too far off the beaten path. I don't see why they wouldn't want to do it, but I think they haven't in the past. So historically, I think that's a change. And certainly if somebody else has a different thought, I'd be open to it. I'm going to jump to the next one from Vaughn.
Yep.
The Yeah, so the way it would benefit the agents in competitive pricing is, you know, part of it's you do have some fairly standard numbers for distance in certain lanes, what a certain vehicle would cost to transport. The margins aren't great. I mean, they're okay, but they're not great, especially for the shorter moves. So getting a recovery yard involved in the process. The one thing I hadn't talked about yet is it frees up spots on your lot quicker. It's great that you're like, okay, we have appointments on these 2 days and that, but you still, the more you have to move around inventory to put vehicles in, to stage them, etc., the less efficient it is, and the lower your margins are going to be. So the quicker you can clear spots off your lot, potentially by hauling those directly to the auction after everything's approved, just don't do it by yourself, to be helpful. But after it's approved and you're either working directly with the finance company or you're working directly with the auction or directly with a broker or another transport company who has a financial relationship, they're going to pay you the next day or in 2 days. So you get paid for that. You free up the spot on your lot and you show up as being one of the good guys helping them, move through their inventory quicker. Steve Garcia had an issue, or not an issue, just an observation. It's not really an issue, but it's, auctions are often subsidizing the transport cost in their auction fees. So part of that could be is if the auction's contacting you, do that. If you're in the recovery business, if you're the owner, the manager, I would hope that you're on a first name basis with the management team at all the auctions in your footprint where you guys operate. If you haven't done that already, I'd encourage you to. You guys are in essentially a very, very similar business. And in the recovery industry, the car business in general is a relationship business. So if there's things that you could do for them, they're going to do some things. They do some things for below cost for their customers sometimes, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't pay you a fair price to move the car. Don't make that assumption. Because some of them, they have their own transportation arms. That's a challenge that they're facing. I know some of the big independents are scratching their heads saying, why are we in this game? It seems like a race to the bottom. I mean, to transport a vehicle is a very much a commodity service, and there are some market prices, and I see that kind of changing a little bit. But yeah, as somebody who competes with auctions, who transport cars for the major commercial consigners, a car that's sold at auction, a decent number to use is it represents somewhere around $800 in revenue for that auction. So that's going to come from any markup they have for sublet fees for transportation, any mechanical, cosmetic work that's done, their sell fees, their buy fees. You add it all up, on average, it's $800 a vehicle. So yeah, they do have some room to take part of that revenue and offset for the inbound transportation. But just because one auction does that, don't assume they're all the same. The one thing I've learned over time, even if they have the big logo on the wall and it all starts with an M or an A or whatever it is, they don't operate the same. They have different general managers. They have very clear financial goals they need to make. And if they can work well with you as a partner, they will. And if there's a change in management or leadership, get over there and meet the new people. Let's see. That was that one.
John Newberry.
Yeah, so cost of transport's involved in remarketing fees. If a recovery fee, if you're looking at one thing I'll tell you can do is, depending upon the transport company, some of us, when we have lanes that are well-used lanes, we know the pricing. We know exactly what the pricing is for those lanes. And for single cars or multiple cars, et cetera, because we have enough experience and we direct dispatch to the drivers for those lanes. When it gets to a vehicle that needs to be moved on a flatbed or a tow truck, that's a whole different story. And there's a lot of variability in price, and it's not just based upon mileage. Sometimes it's tolls, it's traffic, easy to get in, easy to get out. And I think you need to test where the cars are leaving your lot, where they're going to. You're going to find some of them are going to be more open to working with you regarding transport. And some of them are going to say, no, we already got a great smoking deal because this other company has cars going up and down this highway all the time. So it's not always the same. Don't make assumptions. Ask, have the relationships, and I think there's an opportunity for your business to grow. Let's see. And I'm looking at Paul's, it's kind of more of an observation. Paul Meekum's, yeah, so he's saying, look, we've they've got the locksmith department. You guys can all look at the chats as well, those questions. They moved cars running and non-rowing for yeah. So I think what Paul's doing is absolutely on track. He does finish with a question I think I can address. Is we're just trying to figure out why clients choose different auctions, ADESA versus Mannheim versus independent auctions. So that's one that I could talk on for a while, but I'll try to keep it short. Depending upon who the commercial consignor is, if they really have a large footprint, they're trying to disperse their cars, the mix, so they're not overly concentrated in one auction. That could be by model, it could be on value, it could be on color, etc. So they get a little bit more sophisticated. The other thing is sometimes they have a relationship with particular people in the industry that will cause them to bias towards one auction versus another. Sometimes there's a history between those companies that there was a major falling out. They said, no, we're not going to use that company anymore. We're going to switch it to this group of companies, etc. And those things happen all the time. And I think the best thing you can do is if I was running a recovery yard, and if I had the skill that some of you people had and did that, I might even go to the auctions on auction day and after sale day, talk to the people there locally who are the commercial sellers and consigners, develop a relationship with them, go a little bit deeper than just the auction fleet lease manager. By the way, if you do talk to the auctions, that's the person you want to talk to. The general manager, he or she is probably super, super busy and they're super friendly and super accomplished, but they're going to point you towards a fleet lease manager for these types of discussions. And part of it's just understanding, what's going on. And you could ask them, hey, we move these cars for you guys. If you ever have any problem, because a lot of times there's questions about lot damage or transportation damage, etc. And I think the more you can develop a relationship with these folks, the better. I know that major consigners go after auctions all the time for lot damage, because if you think about all the moving vehicles, there can be scrapes and bumps and things that happen along the way. So I think the more you have dialogue and relationships, the better it's going to be. Let's see.
Yeah, Vaughn had a question about liability, and it looks like Renee chimed in on that. Renee Lowe with Harding Brooks.
Oh, Renee always gives me crap, but I love her anyways. Yeah, so Renee brings up, when I talk about dialogue before, having been on a panel with Renee and talk with Renee, she looks at this world from a totally different facet than most of us. And her view is very, very valuable because it has some significant business implications. So make sure as you're allowing different people on your lot, whether there's a third-party vendor, if you're changing your practices in any way, talk to your insurance rep and make sure you're following best practices. You don't want to do anything that's going to cause your rates to go up, or something happened and God forbid you're not covered and you thought it was covered. So stay in sync with them. And Renee and her team are great people to work with. Again, they're kind of like that voice of caution. Be careful about this, be careful about this, careful about this. And I think you would do well to heed her advice and guidance on things as you're trying to, it's sort of like the voice of insurance, the voice of practicality. That's the voice that she's going to offer. And you need to balance that with the other business needs and drivers you have in your business. But I would always listen to Renee. And then Devin, I see your comment about looking to match the car for the best results. That's absolutely correct. There are certain markets where, like when I was with Volkswagen, our polite way, politically correct way to call them was our edgy cars. Those are the cars that were driven hard and they, maybe had some whiskey dents in them, etc. We just found that there were certain auctions in certain markets, specifically Odessa, New Jersey, that we just got the best money possible for them. And so each auction over time has cultivated a group of buyers who come looking for different things. So, Devin's observation about, what you think might be the best car for an auction to use isn't always going to be the closest. So some of them will skip over two auctions because they're spreading out their inventory, or because they know there's a group of buyers who beat each other to death, who like to bid in the lane for those. So to spend an extra $100, $200, $300 in transportation is well worth it. You're going to get that back twofold or tenfold. And so that's absolutely right. And so the more expensive the car, the more late model cars, the higher the willingness to move the car a longer distance. If the car becomes more of like a transportation special that's going to retail for $3,000 to $5,000, then it's going to be likely to go to the next viable closest auction that they can find. And you find oftentimes the subprime finance companies have very, very broad, a high number of auctions that they sell at. And the commercial consigners, they try to concentrate their inventory at particular auctions so that they can negotiate better terms for sale fees. And they cultivate a following of buyers who come electronically or in person to chase after those cars. I think I've touched upon anything. Yeah. But I certainly, my voice is a little bit sore, so I've done more talking than I wanted to, which tells me shut up and give them a chance to take themselves off mute and participate in the dialogue that I proposed.
Yeah, if you've got a question or want to chime in, just unmute yourself and jump right in. Looks like Colleen submitted a question or a comment in the chat. Sometimes it's not a car, but an RV, boat, or motorcycle power sport. And that's auction.
Absolutely right. So for a it's not a car or a truck, it could be a specialty vehicle, an RV, boat, etc. There are auctions that specialize in that. And even if the auction doesn't specialize in it, some auctions do a much better job at presenting that inventory. They have a special part in their sale. They have a talented team to reach out to buyers of that inventory. So if you're in a position to visit the auctions in your area, take note of, do they sell specialty vehicles? How do they sell the specialty vehicles? Because if you have those, depending upon who your customers are and they need to get repossessed, leave it up to them. That finance company will figure out where they want to sell those cars. But you should be aware of where those cars are selling, because if you see a auction sale and you can preview their inventory, if you don't have a dealership license, talk to one of your customers, your friends who does, so you can see what's sold at the different auctions. You'll get a good sense for where those are. And then once you understand your local market, especially if you're not in a huge, highly concentrated area, I think you could become a really good help to the folks that you're recovering cars for, is offering up suggestions that, do you want us to take this to such and such location? This is what we're seeing. Because, when I was with Volkswagen, I was in the corporate office and I tried to visit every auction at least once a year. But local knowledge is really valuable, and that's something that you could add to the process.
All right. Well, we've got a quiet group today. Looks like. Well, Dave, let me ask you this. Would it be okay if I put up your contact information in the chat if somebody wanted to reach out to you directly?
Yeah, you put in my cell phone, put in my email address. I text, I email. And if I can be of any help, really what I'm trying to do is trying to make this a more efficient system. Try to take the friction out of the system. And part of it's trying to find the win-win-wins. The winning solution for a finance company is you take great care of their vehicles. If you need to cut keys, you cut the keys. You do it quickly and efficiently. You work with good, solid vendors. You take care of their consumer customers. If they don't redeem, you get the car to auction as quickly as you can, as conveniently and stress-free as you can. And realize that there's those internal players in there that then it changes. Your customer becomes the auction. And the auctions put on a circus every week. And they have to get as many cars as they can in property, inspected, washed, clean, ready for the next sale. And they do that every week. So those transportation managers, they're underneath a lot of pressure. So if you do anything to make them a hero, it lasts a lifetime. If you do anything to make them look bad, it lasts 2 lifetimes.
Dave Casey came in with a question. You said not to move a vehicle without a key, to just order keys, but what if the client advises that the unit can be released or delivered to the auction without keys? Any suggestions there?
The client's the one who's paying the bill. So given the option, they may say, we'd prefer that you do it. Sometimes the people who are involved in this process, they don't have all the right experience and training. Like early on, you mentioned I was a certified automotive remarketer. I've been a certified automotive remarketer for over 16 years. And I helped with a lot of those testing materials as they've evolved over time. I pretty much guarantee you it's best practice to have keys with the vehicle as quickly as possible. However, the customer is always right? So then if you do have to move it without keys, just be sure that, when the vehicle's in your custody, it's being handled as safely and securely with the right equipment, with properly trained employees as possible. And if you run into a problem with the transportation shows up, and if things are not going well, look out for your best interest of your customer and just push the pause button and make sure it's done right. And I think any good quality transport company would want to know, like, we're a brokerage. These drivers do not work for us. We might have great experience with a particular carrier and they have 30 drivers and they just hired a new person who doesn't, maybe wasn't paying attention when they were trained. I think you should feel licensed to be an advocate for your customer. Press the pause button when and where needed, with explanation. That's the why behind the what. Okay, auctions have limited drop hours. Let's see, did I skip one? Colleen was. Yeah, so there's a question about auctions and if they're willing to take deliveries and their hours of delivery. Well, auctions are oftentimes faced with the same challenges as recovery yards, with staffing, with security, things like that. I think there's the stated hours, and then if you have a relationship, there's a different set of hours. So thus have the relationship. The other thing is, and I was shocked to learn this, and if I'm wrong on this, please somebody correct me. I'll fly to where you're at and we'll go out to a great dinner if this is not true. But when it comes to recovery yards, when I ask, well, where's the database that says, here's all the recovery yards, here's all the equipment that they have, here's the ones that cut keys, here's the ones who are open to transporting vehicles, here's the number of acres or the footprint that they have, and all the other stuff. To my knowledge, that doesn't exist, which is a shame, because if that did exist, then it would make, I think it would improve the industry quite a lot, because there might be some areas where you have a number of excellent operators and in other areas are tremendously underserved. And I think a valuable part of business that I've seen in every business I've been is peer-to-peer benchmarking. So wouldn't you like to know how you stack up relative to your peers in your zip code or your 3-digit zip code or in your county or beyond? I think that information would be super valuable, not only to the finance companies, to the transport companies, to the auctions, but I think it would be valuable to the recovery yards themselves. And the question about the auctions, yeah, the auctions do have an advisory group. James, you asked the question about limited drop hours, etc. Extending their hours. How does that go about? If you want to just reach out to me, James, I can put you in touch with anybody in the auction industry. I frankly have been around for long enough that I know them. And sometimes they restrict things. They've had a lot of problems with theft and some other things going on, and that's why they are less open to doing that. I do know, just to sensitize the group to this, is when they're having their sale, they usually have one big sale day a week for that morning or for that 4 to 6 hour period. They may not take any deliveries. So it just says we as transport companies need to understand the rules of the road for interacting with a recovery yard. You need to understand the rules of the road for interacting, delivering, etc., with the auctions in your area. When they do that, there's so much going on at an auction on sale day to be taking in inventory at that same time. Some of them have just adopted the practice of just pushing the pause button for that 4 or 6 hour window just to limit the number of mistakes that can be made because they shift. It's kind of like an all hands on deck. Everyone wears a couple of different hats. On sale day, they're all focused on making it a great, safe sale. And then 4 hours later, things go back to normal and they can take receipt of vehicles.
So Dave Casey chimed in again. He said he agrees with you, and he's the manager over the keys and transports at his company. So that's why he asks how you might recommend to cut keys for the clients that advise to release the unit without keys.
Well, how would I recommend it?
Yeah.
I think the talk track would be something like this. For the vehicles that don't have keys, do you plan to have keys made prior to reselling the vehicle? The answer is going to be yes. So if you're going to be doing that anyways, why not initiate the process as soon as possible so the vehicle can be moved as cost effectively and as safely as possible? And the answer is going to be, well, we haven't done that in the past, or I'm not authorized to do that. And I think part of it would be, in my belief, is with any relationships you have with companies, try to get at least two deep. It's not always their manager, it could be their peer or diagonally or something, but chances are they're doing something how they were trained to do it, and maybe they didn't get the best, most current training. But I cannot imagine why if it's possible to move a car with keys, why you wouldn't want to do that. And so sometimes you get somebody involved in the process, trying to word this very carefully so I don't poke anybody in the eye. Sometimes you get people involved in the process who are looking at their little piece of it and they're doing things how they were trained. And they heard a meeting last week as we need to control costs wherever possible. Well, that's not controlling costs. That's probably adding to cost in the bigger picture, but in their mind, in their own little world, they're controlling costs. So I'd have to believe if they're not willing to have keys cut before the car's remarketed, they're making a mistake. And if that got high enough in their organization, they wouldn't understand it. And so if Casey, if you or anybody else on the call, if you're having that issue with your challenge and you know who the consignor is, just feel free to reach out to me, send me a note, and I can probably put you in touch with the right people in that organization to express that concern or suggestion in the most positive possible way. And chances are, if it falls upon the right ears, you're going to hear, of course, that makes complete sense.
All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour, Dave. So we're gonna have to let everybody go, but make sure you take down Dave's contact information. If you've got questions, please reach out to him directly. And before we sign off, I just want to remind everybody that if you have not registered for NARS, please do so. The room block is full, but more up-to-date and detailed information is on the NARS website, reposummit.com, reposummit.com.
And Tony, I'm going to be at NARS. So if I said something, if you're there, please come up and say hello. I know it seems like everybody in the auction and remarketing industry, the recovery industry is new to me. So I'll be the guy there who knows the fewest people. And so if you go up and say hi, I'd appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Dave, thanks for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it. And everybody, thank you for joining us. We will see you again next month. So be on the lookout for information on the webinars that are upcoming. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Have a good day, everyone.